This is CUNY TV, the City University of New York.
City University Television presents the American Theater Wing Seminars. Working in the theater. This seminar, play script, director.
Welcome to the American Theater Wing Seminars on Working in the Theater. These are coming to you from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, located on 42nd Street, where Broadway, Off-Broadway, and Off-Broadway all come together to present the magic, the education, the culture, and the excitement that only live theater can bring. Most of you know that the American Theater Wing founded the Antoinette Perry Tony Awards. But I'd like to add that they were created not just for the longest run or the box office smash, but to reward the achievement of excellence in the craft of theater. And so it is with those that receive it. It is a theater's highest honor, and it is coveted by everyone. Out of the Wing's early programs, we continue with that which we started a long, long time ago. We are and have been a long run. We started with the American Theater Wing's hospital program, which sent live theater to hospitals, veteran centers, and now we've added AIDS centers to the program. We continue doing that with professional theater and cabaret entertainment so that those that can't come to the theater have a taste of what live theater can do to ease any kind of pain that they might have. And then we have a Saturday Theater for Children program. Brings theater into the public schools so that children at the very earliest age can see what theater is all about. It comes into their auditoriums and they line up on Saturday mornings and they pay for it, which we feel is a very important part of the program, so that they make a commitment. It also takes in the community as well, because the parents and the Parent Teachers Associations all gather together to help in this program. Then our newest program is called Introduction to Broadway, and it really is that, and it's a wonderful introduction. It's in cooperation with the Board of Education, High School Division, and the American Theater Wing, and those wonderful Broadway producers who have with us enabled tens of thousands of school children to see their first Broadway show. They, too, pay for that, a very minimal rate, but they pay for the ticket. And as a special bonus, the Wing has arranged for performers and as well as the house managers and stage managers to speak with them after the show so they can have a role model to adhere to. And then there are these seminars which are coming to you. We've been doing that for over 17 years, and the who's who of theater has been a part of it. Today's seminar is on the playwright director. We do one on the performers, we do one on the production, on unions and guilds, and on design. And before I go any further, I'm going to turn this over to our very capable co-moderators, and they in turn will introduce this exceptional panel to you. Jean Darrable, who is a member of the Board of Directors of the American Theater Wing, but also one of the most knowledgeable women in the theater that I know, because she's done almost everything in the theater. And George White, who is president of the O'Neill Center and also teaches at Yale and is a director in his own right, and is pretty knowledgeable, I would say. And so, George and Jean, would you please take over now?
Well, I will start by introducing, on my immediate right, Susan Birkenhead, who is the lyricist for Jelly's Last Jam. And next to her is Horton Foote, who is the playwright and director of Roads to Home that is currently playing off-Broadway at the Lambs Theater. Jean, you're not wearing a white hat today. I'm disappointed.
I thought I'd try this one, but I want to ask everybody, does your head swell or do your hats shrink? Because this one was perfectly comfortable 2 months ago. Hardly fits me today. Wiley Hausam, is that the correct way to spell your name?
Wiley Hausam.
Wiley Hausam. He's a theatrical agent at ICM with a client list which includes co-panelist George Wolfe. And, of course, everybody knows what wonderful work they both did on our current hit. Then Luther Henderson, musical adaptor of Jelly's Last Jam, is a very famous man in his own right and for many, many years. And R.J. Barry.
P.
P. Well, this is rather small for my failing eyesight. P.J. Barry, the playwright and director of the upcoming Distance From Calcutta. Tell me something about that. It's the first I've heard of it.
It's opening in January at the York Theater up on 90th Street. Yes.
Really? What is it about? What kind of a show is it?
It's a comedy drama, and it's about a firebrand of a woman who falls in love with the wrong man.
Oh, good for her.
But he turns out to be the right man.
And George C. Wolfe, playwright and director of Jelly's Last Jam.
Thank you. I think we'll start, if we may, with Mr. Foote, with a question of how you first started. Heaven knows you have a huge body of work behind it, but how did you become a playwright? What made you become a playwright? How did you get started?
Well, for pragmatic reasons. I was an actor and belonged to what we would call now an off-Broadway company called the American Actors Company. We were over a little garage. And we wanted to explore American material. We felt that wasn't being done properly, and a wonderful woman named Mary Hunter Wolfe was kind of the spearhead of the company, and Agnes DeMille came down to work with us. And we were doing improvisations to let each of us know about different sections of the country. And I was doing things about Texas, and Agnes said one day, I think you should try writing. Well, I thought, well, all right, and I wrote a play, a one-act play, with the lead for myself. And Robert Coleman came down and saw it and very kindly was encouraging. I thought this fairly easy, and I went to Texas and wrote a full-length play with the lead for myself. And Brooks Atkinson came down to see this and was very laudatory about the production and all the acting except for one. And I decided I would show him and never write again and be the greatest actor in the American theater. But that summer I went away and played a lot of parts and got the acting out of my system, and for good or bad I became obsessed with writing and worked at it ever since.
Where were the theaters in Texas that you did this?
There was here in New York.
Oh, it was, but at the garage. With
69th Street.
Uh-huh. But you said you went back to Texas.
Where my home is. I went back.
And where was the play done in Texas?
It wasn't done there. I wrote it there.
Oh, you wrote it there?
And came back and did it here.
Ah, okay.
With the
Great.
company.
when you first started to write plays, did you send some to John Golden?
No, I never did, Gene. I didn't dare. It was.
Well, somebody sent me your plays.
Did they?
I was working for John.
I know you were.
And I liked very much what you wrote, and I wrote and told you so.
I know that. I was very flattered and felt very good about it. It was very helpful to me.
Susan, what is your story?
A strange one.
Better and better.
I, too, did a lot of acting and singing, and was terrified of the whole audition process, and sort of ran away and had a lot of babies. And I was just sort of this wife and mother, always doing a little acting on the side and doing a little bit of writing. And my first husband ran a summer theater, the Cape Cod Melody Tent. And they had children's musicals on the weekend. And somebody came up to me, knew that I was a musician, and said, can you write a score for Rumpelstiltskin by Tuesday? And I was so stupid, I said, sure. And I did, and I went on and wrote many, got paid for none of them, never thought that anybody would possibly want to pay me for anything that I had written. But several years later, the husband of somebody who had written libretto for one was on a plane and met a producer, and they talked about one particular thing, and I got a letter in the mail that said I would like to option this for NBC. And that never got done, but it got me an agent who said, what do you want to do? And I said, write for the theater, more than anything in the world. And he brought me to the BMI Musical Theater Workshop, Lehman Engel. And all of a sudden, I got a phone call in my first year from Mary Rogers, who had read my lyrics somewhere, and said, I've been asked to be one of the writers of this musical for Broadway, and I read some of your work, and I've never done this, but I was just wondering, and I said, yes. She said, don't you want to know what it is? I said, no, it's okay. And that was working.
Sure.
And then through Mary, I met Julie Stein, began to work with him. Things just happened. And I met George Wolfe.
Which is a very nice segue. George,
yes.
How did you get started?
I started writing, well, I was in college in California, and I was, actually I started out as an actor and a designer, and then I started to direct. And I wanted to, toward the end, I was starting to do a number of plays about, quote unquote, the black experience. But at the time, this was like 73, 74, 75. All the types of plays that were available to me that were about black people were very stylist. They were very realistic, and that energy was not very attractive to me. It just didn't seem to be the way that my brain worked theatrically. So I started writing to give myself some work as a director, fundamentally. And then through the course of writing, I went, oh, I like this, and it was, so that's really how I started to write, just as a director. And then,
what was the first thing that you sort of did?
I wrote this play called Up for Grabs, which was the story of Joe Thomas, who was given away at the age, one day after he was born. He was placed inside of a soundproof booth where he was given nothing but cereal boxes to read, and all of a sudden, at the age of 21, he was released into this world called Up for Grabs, which was actually a game show. But because he had never experienced life, he was going through it as if this was life, and it was sort of like this strange, very, that was the first thing. So you see, it was so there were no walls, and there was no couch, and there was, it was this whole other thing.
Okay.
Where was that done?
In the Claremont colleges, and it ended up winning an award. So I said, "Oh, okay, this is nice."
Did you direct it?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
Okay. PJ.
God. The first, I was in the 6th grade. I wrote a play called Why Mothers Get Gray. I wrote it, I directed it, I played the lead, I put it on in my cellar. I had all the kids from the neighborhood charged 10 cents to get in, and made a lot of money. That's That's the way it began. I was very initiated into, I was like a song and dance kid, all that baloney. And that's really how it began. And I stopped writing after that. I never wrote again until I was in the Korean War, and I came back from there, and I wrote a novel, and it was terrible. And I wrote another novel, and it was terrible. And I wrote another novel, and somebody said, it's not bad, but why don't you turn it into a play? So that's what I did. And from then I began, I just really began to write. And I think I was learning a lot about writing plays. And as time went on...
How were you learning about writing plays? Were you studying? Were you
No,
out of school,
I wasn't studying much. I remember going to the University of California in Berkeley under the GI Bill. But I wasn't. I came to New York. I worked with a theater company. It was John Cassavetes and that whole group then. And it was like a lot of workshop stuff. And then as time went on, I got married and I had children, 3 children. And I was writing plays, and I couldn't get them on. It was a son of a gun. I just couldn't get anybody interested. So I formed a theater company called the Fulton Theater Company, where I directed my plays and wrote them. And that's how I began. And then I became director of the Hudson Guild Theater after that. But that's how I began, by forming a company and getting the plays on.
Where'd you get the money to form the company?
Oh boy, there was a lot of, sometimes I got donations from people. It was really out of my own pocket, money that I saved. And then I got grants from the New York State Council on the Arts, because you had to do it on your own, and from the box office that was coming in. So it was really a lot of hard work and a lot of...
That's the way you do it, though. That's the way to do it.
And that was the only. I mean, it was the only way. And so that just opened up a lot of doors. And then, as I said, I went and I ran the Hudson Guild Theater, and that opened up more. But that's where I began to play. And the first play that I would call a professional was called "She Played Good Piano," which was about an Irish wake.
But you did a lot of acting too.
Yeah, I've done a lot of acting. I still do a lot of acting. I do a lot of commercials and stuff. But yes, I've done all 3. Which has been, one is balanced off the other on many occasions.
Well, that seems to be the tradition of going back to, probably, if we knew, Aeschylus probably did the same thing.
Yeah. Well, Horton did it, so
yeah, well, exactly.
I stayed out of my plays most of the time, Horton.
Mr. Anderson, what about you? I realize it's a different thing, but it's a
different thing. What should I say? How shall we talk about writing music?
Yeah, and start. Yeah,
okay. Sure. I would guess that the reason that I started writing music was because along the way it became evident that I was never going to be able to top Art Tatum or Horowitz or Mead Lux Lewis or any of those guys, because I didn't have the character to go and practice that much. And plus that tied up with the fact that I had the good luck to be sponsored by a man by the name of Duke Ellington, who decided, since I was a graduate of the Juilliard Institute, that I should be his classical arm, as he so naively put it. I think I took the line of least resistance, and I guess I kind of backed into writing, because I found that it was a good thing to be able to write things and have other people play them, do their thing my way. So I don't want to go into a whole thing about it, but I would guess that I'm writing music because of Duke Ellington, George Gershwin, Richard Rodgers, and various people along the way.
Well, the Duke Ellington was, in effect, your mentor.
Yes, I'd say so. Yes, he, his son and I, Mercer, went to school together, and we hung out a lot. Went to these various nightclub spots and listened to the band and various other places that weren't where the band was. I won't go into that. I prevailed upon my parents to to send me to the jury. I was going to be a mathematician. I was a good boy in school, and I accidentally got 100% in a geometry regents, you see. And I thought that was the message. I thought that was, you know, from Garcia or something. At any rate, I soon found in City College after 2 years that it required more than just looking cursorily at the books, you know, and a half hour before you went to class was not going to make it, you know. So I persuaded them to send me to the jury. I had to have a degree. In my family, not having a college degree was to court, you know, excommunication or something. I don't know what could happen. So that I had to have a college degree. So that's how I got into the Juilliard. I'm still at the same time very much interested in the jazz music and in the extension of it. I think this is what I got mainly from Duke Ellington, was his desire to stretch, to put it into different forms. He wanted to be in the mainstream, but not just in the quote-unquote black mainstream, in the mainstream of the world. And I think this is what he did with a lot of his music. And I'm thinking that doing Jelly's Last Jam, I'm making a big jump here, right?
It's a fine jump.
Doing Jelly's Last Jam and finding, how shall I say, a road through a young man named George C. Wolfe, through which I could travel all this stuff in my head about making this jazz music say something, do something, be something in a venue other than that from the Tenderloin from which it came. It's something that I think that Duke Ellington would really have wanted to do, would really like to do. And I like to think that Jelly Roll Morton, in a kind of a reverse kind of a way, with me, helped him to do that.
Great. There are a lot of agent jokes, as we know, but
jokes. A lot of joke agents.
All I am is a stranger. And that, but there are also Wiley, did you start out wanting to be a fireman, a milkman, whatever, and then turned out this way?
Or were you an actor?
Oh, exactly. Right.
Fortunately, I never had delusions of being an actor, because there was just obviously no way that was ever going to happen. I became an agent kind of by accident. I'm very, happy to say that the first job that I had in the theater was from Hal Prince, and he asked me to be the production assistant on the Broadway production of Evita, and we had met when I was working at an opera company in Chicago called the Lyric Opera. So originally I wanted to be an opera singer, and then gradually it was just like from music to opera to theater to straight plays. And through a kind of a circuitous route, I got sent to ICM in 1981 and interviewed with a very fine agent named Bridget Aschenberg there. And they put me in the mailroom, and I was there for a couple of months, and then I became her secretary, and I was her secretary for really quite a long time, and then eventually was promoted.
What did you do with Howard Prince when you said you started it?
Well, I was the product. They had a position on all of his musicals called The Observer, and it's, I think, probably still continues to this day. And people like, I think Fritz Holt, and a lot of people who ended up producing and doing musicals have had this position, and I just observed. I just watched how you put together a Broadway musical, and at some point when it was trying out in L.A., I actually took some of his notes and sat next to him and just kind of watched him react to what was going on stage, and Ruth Mitchell was right there next to him, and it was an extraordinary experience, extraordinary first experience. I remember at the opening night of the show in L.A., Ken Billington, who was the lighting designer, said to me, "Well, this is it. It doesn't get any better than this, so just remember that." And then, back down to the bottom, one tiny step at a time.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful experience.
It was wonderful. Really wonderful.
What was Duke Ellington like during those days?
What was Duke Ellington like during those days? Oh, I have to give you a very biased opinion. I loved him. What can I tell you? This is the way it was.
I did too.
Huh?
I did too.
he worked, well, for instance, my first real engagement with him was doing what he called his extended pieces, Harlem, New World of Coming, and Night Creature, for a sort of a concerto grosso, which is kind of a sort of a, for his orchestra and symphony orchestra. Many years ago at Carnegie Hall. Now, for that, I had to travel with him. I hadn't traveled with him. I had to go around. At the time, he had, and Strayhorn had gotten a very nice job for me to do. I was as Lena Horne's conductor and arranger, and I traveled around with her for a while. But this was during a period of hiatus with Lena. And he would work, go to his go to the theater, go to the nightclub, work till 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, stay up and work until 5, 10, have some breakfast, maybe take a nap and go work around. I've seen him, I've traveled with him working, 3 days in a row. It seems to me without sleep. I find I was, even in my youth, I found that I was not physically up to this, this kind of rigor.
We're lucky.
But what I found about him was that he was absolutely intrepid. Something that we would know. Strayhorn and I would often talk about. Surely he didn't mean to do that. This must be wrong. He couldn't. It's not. Or you go to a recording session and it'd be something, so blatantly, it's just wrong, that's all. It's not even genius, it's just wrong. And, but he would decide that that's what he's going to, and somehow or other would manage to melt it down, would manage to incorporate, would manage to make you think that this was the greatest thing that ever happened to you. Right. And he did this with all of his people, with his I think that he was the greatest composer the world may have ever known, because he didn't just compose with music. He didn't just compose with notes and things. He composed with people. He used me and Strayhorn and Johnny Hodges and everybody else. A lot of the musicians who thought that they were playing themselves, do you see? They thought that they were doing their own thing when they played these solos. Mm-hmm. They even went so far as to go out and get their own bands to play with it. Well, but they found out that they weren't playing themselves, and they had to come back to the band.
Since we're lucky enough to have these 3 collaborators here, I'd like to start to say, how did they all get together? Who came to who first on Jelly Roll?
And then I'd like to pick up on that, too, for Susan, because a lot of people wonder what comes first, the lyrics or the music, too, which is all part of this collaboration, too, if you want to address both that and how you all got...
How did you get together? How did you start Jelly Roll? Who?
Well, there was a workshop that was done when the show was called Mr. Jelly Lord that Margot Lyon and Pam Coslow did with, and Gregory was involved, and a bunch of other people were involved. And I believe that you were somewhat a part of that.
Yes, I was involved peripherally in a way.
And I was not there, and Susan wasn't there. And then so it sort of died down, and they tried a bunch of book writers. Then they found out about me, and then they called me up, and I came on board as the book writer. And I was working with Susan on another project, which is a journey unto itself, and so that I immediately...
Obviously, it didn't come out.
Well, truly it didn't,
yeah.
And I'm very glad that in some respect that it didn't happen, but at the same time, she and I then formed a wonderful working relationship, and we started, working, trying to take the songs and examine them ourselves, and lyrics here, song, what about, and we were working with someone who was sort of a Jelly Roll Morton expert, but really didn't know theater. And then all of a sudden it was like, ding, Luther Henderson, and then who knows theater, who knows Jelly, and who knows so many other things. So it was that sort of, this I don't know how would you describe it. This very sort of three I don't know, it was like we worked individually, but we were also this same thing, this same creature. I mean,
I would say we were fingers on the same hand, the three of us.
You know, and then at one point, then I was then hired on as the director on the project, and then that sort of changed things somewhat, but not really, because by that time we were all, there was this creature that was working on the show. That was not me, that was not her, that was not him, it was just
How
us.
long ago was that when you first came together?
Oh, God.
Almost
4.5
4.5 years.
4.5
years.
that long?
It's been that long time.
Yeah.
So that was 4 years before we saw Jelly Roll.
Yes.
And
Exactly.
then there were various workshops that happened. There was a show that we did at the Marte Forum, and one of the things which I think which was so wonderful about the show, that it was nurtured every single step of the way, because we knew what we didn't want it to be, and we knew what it was, but it was going down a dark tunnel finding it and not trying to have it be la-di-da-di-da-di-da-di-da, but wanted to figure out how the music and how the texture of this man's life could exist with another level of grit, much the way it did, and try to find the texture that this music comes from, as opposed to just doing the music, also finding the cultural and emotional and psychological texture that went along with it.
So it was a slow evolutionary process.
Very much
through
so.
a series of...
Yeah. There were things which were very clear from the very beginning, and then there were other things that were grueling in order to try to find the piece that was leading you down this tunnel.
What was clear at the beginning and what was not? A little bit more specific.
Well, that he was dead, and that this evening was a night of redemption. That that somehow it was about figuring out that the relationship between pain and brilliance and isolation, and I also knew that it could also be about, simply because his journey seemed to follow in a very fascinating way, with him going from the South up to Chicago, this sort of journey that, I don't know, there was something about this piece what was about America in some very strange way. It was not just Jelly Roll Morton, and it was not just jazz, but his journey was the journey of America. And that his sins are the sins of America, and his brilliance is the brilliance of America.
Okay, that's a big encompassing theme. Right.
Yeah.
And then, so you had to bring forth what he was saying.
Yeah.
Within your lyrics.
Exactly. Well, Luther and I have a joke. Every so often, George would say, "Now, this number is the number upon which everything
the whole thing rests."
Everything rests." And I say, right. How come, George? There are 5 or 6 or 7 of those numbers.
No, but this is the one. Right?
The real one.
This is the real one, right?
The other thing about it, well, 2 things about it were quite difficult. First of all, Morton's music is not inherently theatrical. And Luther was required to take this as source material, really, and create a whole new theatrical score, which was a wonderful luxury for me, because initially I had music on cassettes, Morton's music as played. And
instrumental music,
exactly, and I
not
have
vocal
to
music.
grab a clarinet line from here and try to fashion a song form. When Luther began to work with us, we worked as a composer and lyricist and book writer, and we would sit together and discuss the moment and knew what had to happen in the moment, and we would just all do it like that. It was like having a composer, in fact. So it was quite wonderful.
It turned out to be quite wonderful, too. They didn't have the advantage of having 3 people.
No. I was going to ask as Horton Foote if, right, you're 2 in 1. And there is, and I see it in 3 people here today, there is, again, a theory in the theater that playwrights should not direct their own work. Indeed, that they aren't able to step back with that. And I wondered if you would address that a little bit. So how do you feel about that? Obviously, you're doing it, but...
I think it depends, for myself, it depends on the play that I'm involved with. In other words, I wouldn't like to direct all my plays. I have chosen not to direct my plays mostly. There are certain plays that mean a great deal to me and of mine that I think I have a kind of a real emotional affinity for. And if I feel that, then I take the job.
You don't think that that robs you of objectivity?
Well, that's up. I mean, you can also say that a director, sometimes the playwrights don't think the director has objectivity. They get very subjective themselves and impose their own subjectivity on the play.
Sure.
So that's basically a question of, in my own case, mostly the directors I've worked with, I've had enormous rapport with. And I've always felt that they had great respect for the writer, which because it's a fundamental credo with me. I'm against wars in theater. I think that we're a collaborative medium, and I think it's time we all learn to get along together. And I think that one ego dominating the other is just indefensible and counterproductive.
Yet the lament that we hear so often is that the playwright falls in love with his own words and doesn't have that objectivity, and it's very hard to overcome that, where the director is saying that it would play better if you cut perhaps even whole scenes of it.
Well,
and that's where the conflict comes in.
I think often, and I think that's because often the playwright has cut himself off from other areas of theater. I was an actor, so I understand the acting problems, have directed, and I think playwrights should get in there and mix up and do all kinds of things. George Wolfe is a very good example of that. You wouldn't ask a composer to compose a symphony without knowing the instruments of the orchestra in some fashion, some way.
Also, I think that a play it's sort of a child, and it sort of looks like you, but it's not you. And I think that that as soon as you create it, it's no longer yours. So that therefore, and you're now in charge of parenting it as a director. So that therefore, you have to allow its own personality to exist and assert itself, and realize how, oh, I see, I'm in here in this respect, but it's very different from me in this other respect. So that therefore, by not viewing it as you, but as something that you were a part in the birthing of, in some strange way, allows you, I think, to slice it, rearrange it, and fix it in a way so that every time you're cutting it, you aren't cutting your arm or your heart or your soul. You're cutting it.
Yeah.
How do you feel about the right to have your words cut from the play?
Well, if it's not working, it's not working. I mean, you know what I'm saying? You know, I'm just,
But I think any knowledgeable playwright's going to come to that conclusion, if there's any sense, as soon as the director does.
Also, there are jewels, and then there's this gunk around it. And if you can clear off the gunk, the jewel is going to soar. You know what I mean? And so some of that gunk is you, and the jewel is also you. You know, so you just go, and then all of a sudden, over and over, I mean, there are like, in Jelly Heaven, there are 847 versions of the show. Brilliant numbers that were not right.
Actually, it's 849.
But that takes, I would think, a certain amount both of objectivity on the playwright's part, and it's a great deal of experience to have the confidence and the kind of security to be able to cut the gunk around.
But you're obeying your subject. You aren't obeying you.
Yes. That's right.
You're obeying the play. You're not obeying you. I mean, I think that I have a very large ego, but I use that ego to serve the play, not to serve myself.
Good.
Because it's really not. It's not about me. You know, if I want it to be about me, I'll go stand in front of a mirror and go, "Ooh, you're wonderful. You're wonderful." But it's not about that. It's about the work.
Yeah.
You know, it's
And
this
also,
other thing.
I feel, I don't mean to imply that can't be interpretations of a play by either actor or directors, because they can be. I know that in Trip to Bountiful, it was first up by Lillian Gish, who's brilliant and was extraordinary. And then 30 years later, Geraldine Page did the same part. Well, you can't imagine, two were different talents. But as far as I'm concerned, they were both valid, both moving, and illuminated my play and taught me a great deal.
Were there any plays that you wish that you had directed because You felt it hadn't come out the way you wanted it to?
Not really. I wouldn't blame the director, then I think it was my fault.
Did you ever bring in Ellington to criticize?
Do I do what?
Did you ever bring in Duke Ellington to listen to your work? Did he ever criticize it?
Oh, you mean when he was alive and I was working?
Right.
Yes, and he did, because I have the one criticism that I remember is that I should be sure not to write too many things for these wonderful improvisational people to read. And the reason I remember that is because working with George Wolfe, I envision him as a kind of a Duke Ellington in a way, because he enjoys, which is wonderful, doing things and making things happen out of what's there. I have to have a little more structure. That structure is not always exactly the right thing to have, and I need sometimes to have impinged upon me a little what he used to call chaos, you know.
Chaos.
That's literal, not just initials.
What is your take on directing your own work?
Well, I kind of agree with Horton, and I've had instances where I've worked with directors and they've been fine, and I had directed a play that had been done elsewhere at Long Island Stage. I directed it at York Theatre last year, and it went very well, but it had already been done. But anyway, this new play that I'm going to do in January there,
What's the name of it?
It's called The Distance From Calcutta. And this all came up, and it was like we were talking about this, it never happens. I finished this play in May, and it's going to be done in January, because plays usually take about 4 years to get on. Yeah. Anyway, this happened, and it was just, do you want to direct? And I said, yes. And it was just one of those things, and I knew it was right, and I'm still an actor as well, but that helps a great deal. And the actors that did this reading were the actors that I wanted to do it, because I know them, I'd worked with them, we'd worked in many situations, or they'd been in plays of mine and stuff. And it all was, it was just right. And I'm pretty ruthless with cutting. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. You know, you just say, let's go, you know. Or sometimes, which is interesting to me, I was doing a play out in California, and this woman wanted to cut, and I said, wait a minute. I said, that doesn't seem right. Let's wait a couple of days, you know, which I find happens. Let's wait a couple. If there's really wild cuts, and I usually can feel it. It usually hits me, or it's usually up there on the stage. But a lot depends when the audience comes in. You know, you just there it all clicks. But I'm very comfortable because I've done a lot of it. I mean, I don't feel thrown by it, and I think, as we all know, when you get those actors, that's casting is really makes a lot of difference.
Do you tend to use the same people in your readings that you then go on for the run? Do you have a set of people that you call upon?
Well,
how important is that for?
I think that all depends. I mean, by now there are a lot of actors that I've worked with, or I've worked in plays of mine, like this. Someone like Ann Petoniak, whom I've worked with or has worked in plays of mine, and then suddenly I thought, my God, Ann's so right for this. You know, it doesn't mean you're going to get them or your first choice, but I just think, it's wonderful to have, to with a little age, a lot more actors, and you have you can go to them, and a lot of them, particularly want to work in your work or whatever. So it's. But it makes a big difference.
Speaking of casting, it brings you around to the agents. And do you put together packages, Wiley, or do you do both?
Well,
I mean, when you see directing, or a playwright who wants to direct his own play, and how does that go?
Rather than talk about packages, which, it's a popular agent sort of thing to talk about, I don't know that it's necessarily a healthy thing, and I don't think it really happens that way. But I do think that the matching of writer and director is probably the most important creative issue that you face when you're trying to make a show happen, and it often happens kind of haphazardly and by accident. And often when a writer I think, doesn't have the success that they should have fairly early on. Maybe it's because they haven't found that right interpreter of their work yet. I mean, there's one client in particular that I've been really looking for years for just the right director to interpret his work. And then when you get into a situation where they're both a writer and a director, I mean, not every writer can direct his own work successfully. And I think that George's ability to shift from one mode into another is unique in my experience, because they're very different kinds of crafts, really, and states of mind. And not every writer can do it.
I would like to also ask Horton Foote, and we can pass this around, in terms of, now that we knew how you all started, what would you advise young people in terms of getting going as a playwright?
Well, people not so young that want to go into this.
People, yes, people of any age.
Well, advice is cheap and free, you know.
No? Fair enough.
I hate to use the word luck because I really believe in it, but let's say circumstances play a large part. I think, because I know many talented people that have just gone around in circles and circles and circles, and I don't know what would have happened to me if Robert Coleman hadn't come to see my first play. I mean, I didn't plan that. And I think more and more I find that kind of circumstance happened to someone that helped them move on. I guess the main thing is that I do feel that keep at it and not get discouraged. That's what I tell my daughter, who's a playwright. And build up a body of work, because I have things that I've written 15 years ago that are just being done now. And also, I think today, with off-Broadway and the regional theaters, that there are many opportunities for playwrights that didn't exist when I came along, because then it was Broadway was our only kind of outlet. And so I think it's important early on to get established with a theater of any kind, so that you kind of get to know the workings of a theater and a company, and get the chance to do many things in a company. Not just be the playwright, but maybe build some scenery and act a few parts and try directing. I agree with you. All
crossover in
I would say
theater.
do everything. Especially if you're a writer. If you act, even if you do it badly, act. If you direct, I would also say to do costumes and set, because if you find yourself in the presence of a director or a designer who says, this can't be done, you can say, oh, yes, it can, because I know how to do da-da-da-da, because you have to defend yourself against bad artists who are working on your work. And the best way to defend yourself is by knowing something about their various crafts.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
Horton, you said before you said the luck came in, but your play got on, and somehow that got on, and that's the most important thing, is to get that play on in front of an audience, attached to a theater company, or start your own.
Yes.
But it means nothing until you get them on and you get them out, the scripts.
And then what about having someone see it? So how do you get them to come and see it?
Well, I think you get to that. You mean somebody with some influence or
That's right.
I think you get, because you do one, then you do two, and then you do three, and then they begin to review them.
Would you go to see? Would you go to see a storefront?
It's a very small community, and everybody knows each other. And when something's happening out there, whether it's a brand new little off-Broadway company or whatever, you hear about it, and you get down there, and if the work is good, the word gets out.
Another thing that young playwrights have, which in my day we didn't have, is the process of readings or workshops or whatever. Mm-hmm. Now, I was very much against them when I first heard about them, but I must say I've experienced now several of these reading episodes.
What was the reason for being against them?
I thought it was kind of a lazy way and kind of a postponement of getting the job done. But I must say I find them have been personally valuable, and I see for young writers they're invaluable. Mm-hmm. Because they often get very experienced actors to do a reading that they couldn't get to perform the work. And they can learn, I think, many things.
Do you cast actors for readings?
Well, sometimes we do actually have readings.
Do they need an agent as well?
I'm sorry,
does an actor or an actress need an agent in order to come to get a part in a reading?
In a reading, no, I don't think you do. If you know people in the community,
It's people who you know.
Kind of a family. Yeah, you
Okay.
know,
Sort of know.
But
call your cousins.
sometimes the readings, I agree, and it can get healthy. It also can get really wild after a while, because if you read a play over, you can get so attached, because a play is to get up there on the stage. And in reading, sometimes you can get very unfocused because of some actor who was so great, doing a reading. But it's got to get up on its feet. I mean, it's got to get out there on its feet. And I think they're good, but sometimes I have found that they go on too long until you're read to death.
And they can distort.
Yeah, they can distort. Or you can, just because of...
How do you feel about readings, Jean? Did you use them?
Yes, always. We always began a play with the cast sitting around a table and reading and discussing the play and the characters and the situations, and sort of getting them clear in everyone's mind before we went any further. And sometimes we would read 2 or 3 times before we got on our feet. And I found that it was very, very helpful.
I think what you said was very important.
It would take 2 or 3 days sometimes.
But that's great. That's in rehearsal, though. I think that's a
Yes, that's when you begin.
That's
when you
fine. That's a
begin the
part of
work.
it. That's a part of the process.
I think it's also difficult with a musical sometimes now, because so much of a musical is visual and physical.
Yes.
We had a number of experiences. Sat and read,
that one,
and our show on a page looks most peculiar. I mean, now, we have stage directions and whatnot, but it's very difficult to do unless you get people up on their feet. And God bless the Mark Taper Forum, because they gave us workshops where we had actors to use as tools.
Did that take place in New York, the workshop?
No, Los Angeles.
Los Angeles,
And
yes.
then this past fall, there was a workshop in New York, which was about the work, but it was also about the hype and the money. So, but in Los Angeles, it was about the material exclusively. Whereas the one in this past fall was about show and tell time. So that you can't really explore the material. You can somewhat, but there's always the awareness that at any given moment, all these people with money are going to come in and go. So there's a whole other rhythm and thought process going on when you're trying to solve problems, and then when you're trying to look good, and
What was the reading from hell you imagine?
Well, it was one of those readings that should not have happened, because we were halfway. As I look back on it now, I think that we were halfway through abandoning a certain direction and on our way to a new direction, and we were somewhere in the middle, so that we were not very arrogant about where we were on a certain level. Because I think every single time you do a reading of some sort, you should do it when you go, this play is perfect. There's nothing absolutely wrong with it. And then you do the reading and you go, oh my God. And then you start all the ways. If you do a reading going, why are we doing this reading now? We shouldn't be doing this in front of these people. And we started out like that, and it came across as that, and then they were going, this is the worst thing we've ever seen.
That's right. Sure did.
I remember doing a reading once up at it was in Albany at the Empire State Institute, and it was there were 6 actors. 5 of the actors were excellent. I had gone up there and they were doing the reading of the play, and we rehearsed for a week, and 5 were excellent and 1 wasn't, So there was a kind of an audience give and take and talk afterward. Well, everybody talked about the character that this one lousy actor was playing.
Something wrong with the way you
something wrong, and it was obvious. I knew right away it was because this actress was, not up to par with the other one. So that tilted, and you have to understand, the playwright has to understand that the play's going to get tilted, and you're hearing it in a reading.
But that happens in a production, too.
Exactly.
I'll say.
Exactly.
Yes.
I still think young writers can learn from anything.
Oh, yeah.
Unquestionably.
Yes.
Get their feet wet.
And there's one other benefit of readings, too, I think, because in these days when it's so hard to get a production and you make 50 submissions before you get a theater who actually says, we want to produce this play, to have a reading every now and then just gives the playwright some kind of psychological sustenance. It's like, oh, I did write this. It is good. It will work. We'll keep hoping, and it'll get produced.
Can read it.
Yeah.
That's very good.
Were you all three involved in the readings, in each one of the readings?
Yes.
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 Did we read? No.
Yeah, I remember you were there.
Yeah, we were all
very
there.
much
And
involved.
that's a big job with a musical. I mean,
It's
that's
very big. And it becomes a question of, okay, who's going to sing the song?
Right.
We are, you know, I mean, we're
That's-
pretty good singers,
That's
Luther, but
right.
we're not, you
Well,
know.
that is a very good question. About readings, particularly with musicals, we have a choice. Shall we go quasi-production and have people who are excellent singers, who do a job and that they're very well, and they should do these songs with which they are totally unfamiliar, and should show off their or do we, the creators, do the very best that we can in whatever little voices that we do have and give the essence of it? Do you understand?
Yeah.
I don't think that that's been resolved as yet. You know, in the history of the theater.
There was also in the workshop that we did in the fall, there was an actress who should remain nameless who did this number, and she was a good talent. She was a good talent, and the number worked so-so. And all the producers and people saying, that sequence is still not working. That sequence is still not working.
Yeah.
I says, no, there is a singer who is a force of nature who I want to cast in
That's
the
right.
show.
I remember.
Yes.
We cast her in the show, the exact same number,
It would be different.
done by this singer who is a force of nature, is an extraordinary moment in the show now. I won't say who it is. So
But that meant you had to know people.
Precisely, exactly.
You know what they
but the
could
Knowing
criticism-
that this moment, this song was good and correct and right. We just hadn't found at that point in time the right energy for that number. Because otherwise, if we had faltered, we it would have been like, let's trash the
We're
number.
going to have to take a break now and just stretch, and then we're going to come back and continue not only this, which is I find absolutely fascinating, and I'm sure the audience does too, but there are going to be a lot more questions being asked from the audience to you. So everyone, please stand up, take a break, walk around the chair, and sit right down again, because they're coming right back to continue the second half.
People really do
They come and ask for your letters.
Theater Wing seminars on working in the theater, which are coming to you from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. I'm Isabel Stevenson, and I'm president of the American Theater Wing, and this is a seminar on playwriting, directing, and the lyricist and composer. We've got them all in together, the collaboration that goes on. And George White and Jean Dalrymple, co-chairs, will continue this discussion with these most talented people that we have, most generous of their words as well.
PJ, I'd like to pick up. You were about to leap in before the break with something.
Well,
I was dying to figure out what it was. Were you going to sing? I don't know what.
No. We were talking about when you do a reading or it's the presentation, whether it's a creative team that does it or you get actors and you're doing it. Anyway, I went to the center stage. There were 3 playwrights going up there. These were going to be stage readings on a weekend, and all the playwrights arrived on a Monday and were assigned directors and so forth and so on. And the actors were all coming in. They'd been hired from New York, and they were all coming in the next day. This was the center stage in Baltimore. Anyway, we all sat there, and they said, well, the head director said, now, we want each playwright to read his own play aloud. And I thought, oh, my God. And he said, how about you, PJ? Will you start? And I went, okay. My play, The Octave Bridge Club, had 8 women and 1 man, all on stage, all the time. Okay? So I started, and I thought, this is going to kill me. I'll never get through it, and I did it. And the interesting thing was, I found out a lot as I went along. Mm-hmm. I mean, just in that process, myself reading it. I mean, but I was even aware of almost small cuts that we're doing as I went along. That was very interesting to me. And there were a lot of places or processes, just like sometimes the first day of some rehearsals, where the playwright does read the play.
We do that, you know.
Yeah, at the O'Neill it was done that way, and that's a fascinating. I mean, it's a fascinating process. It's a lot of work, but that just happened. It was interesting that the person that wrote it, and then you suddenly do it, and there you're doing some of your work as it's going along.
I think that does give insights. to a playwright. For instance, I've seen in the reading process playwrights bogging down, realizing their own cuts, and they're saying, "My God, this is going on forever." You know, and they have to do it. What an actor does. Beyond that, how we've talked about getting the readings, and a little bit about going into specific productions. How about spreading the word, going beyond the first reading, beyond even the first production? Do you, well, say Horton Foote will start, promote your own plays? How do you do that? Is there a way to do that? How do you move from, let's say, the initial reading or even the initial production? Does word get around? Do you do some of that?
I think it's an act of God, really. I mean, I don't know. I think there are certain people who are careerists in that sense and know how to do that. I don't know how to do it. I've been fortunate, I suppose, because I do get productions, and out of those productions come other productions. But anything that I've really set out with the determined will to do often has backfired. So I just kind of stand back and write.
I'm always surprised how it came about. Agent might not want to hear this, but most of what has happened has been through some fluke of a play that winds up getting in production. As we talked before, sometimes it seems to me most of the plays that I've done, except this new one, it takes about 4 years, it seems, before you get from the print into production, before that production starts. Just like you were saying about Shelley's Last Rose, it took what? You know, I mean, that's a musical, and of course it would take longer. But it came out. It would always come out of the blue, as he said, as Horton said. You can really hustle, or you can try to get it, or you want to get a certain actor or a theater or whatever. But you know, luckily, somebody will call or something like that. But a lot of it just seems to come out of nowhere sometimes. But I've initiated a lot of things. I mean, I would call. Well, I've sent, if there's somebody I knew, they'd say, I want to see your next play, or a director I'd worked with or something like that. He'd say, well, send it to me when the next one's finished, or something like that. Or I wound up at the Actors Theater of Louisville because on a fluke I said, oh, to hell with it, I'll just send it to them. They'll never do it. You know, and I said, and they did. And God, I'm trying to think of other odd circumstances.
Well, I also think that a dynamic of working in the theater is that your peers who you meet when you're poor and struggling move on as you move on, and then they pop up in offices, working at theaters, have become actors, and you know, and everyone who you work with eventually hires you, or you hire them.
Right.
And I think that's very important. And you know, I also think that after a while, certain places can become somewhat like homes. Because you know, at the Marte Performance, down at New York Shakespeare Festival, at Crossroads, I have various places where I go, I've got this thing and I want to work on it. And I know that they will not screw around with the work, that they will allow me the chance to discover and I don't know, just be lost. And I think that somehow that's very valuable, because I also think that working on a play is very important to not know what you're doing, because by not knowing what you're doing, you discover a deeper way of doing what you thought you knew. You know what I mean? So I think those places where you can feel secure are very important.
Can you cast your mind back to when you were last on the seminar, which I think is almost 10 years? And
no, not that long.
Not that long? You're so young looking. But where did you come from there? Do you remember the roads? Because you were so articulate then, but even more so now. Where are the homes that you passed along the way?
What happened was my show, the Colored Museum.
That was Colored Museum?
No, that was actually Spunk. But the Colored Museum was done at Crossroads Theater as part of a contest that the Dramatists Guild had sponsored. That was at 5 theaters, and I wasn't going to send my play out to Crossroads because I didn't think they did my kind of work. And which is so, and I also fundamentally didn't believe in contests, because I felt as though that you're submitting your work to a bunch of young readers who are just out of college, who oftentimes want to impress their bosses by going, this is awful, this is terrible, this is disgusting. So that I always found that if I knew someone in the theater, they would usher my work along in a much better way, as opposed to a bunch of strangers, you know. So from there, Joe Papp saw the show, and then it was done under the public, and that's when sort of things started to happen. And then I did my piece Spunk, which was actually done at a reading at the Mark Taper Forum. We did a workshop at the Mark Taper Forum, a production at Crossroads, and then we opened up at the New York Shakespeare Festival. So it was, and it was that route of each various theaters nurturing, and then the same thing with Jelly in many respects. It was nurtured at various places.
I also think that an agent is a compatible agent. I've had one agent all my life, Lucy Kroll, and she's been imaginative and far-seeing and very helpful. And one thing that I have done recently, the only time I've ever taken a kind of an aggressive stance on my own, I have a play that, for many reasons, I don't really want done in America right now. And I'm a great admirer of Alan Ayckbourn. So I'd never met him, but I asked Lucy to send the play. He has a theater of his own in England, and he loves the play, and he's trying to find a way to do it. So that's...
Well, that's what you were talking about, to go beyond that.
I was thinking, at the break, I was, excuse me, telling Isabel about our newest Nobel Prize winner, Derek Walcott, who had probably the roughest time of any playwright I can imagine. He grew up in St. Lucia, in a small island in the Caribbean, moved to a slightly larger island in Trinidad with no actors, no theaters that would do his work, no scene designers, no directors, no playwrights. He came up to New York, went to the Circle in the Square school, learned his craft in all those different things. In about 6 months, went back to Trinidad, started writing, directing, designing, building sets, and training his own actors so he could create his own plays.
Yeah.
And and here it is. This year he won the Nobel Prize. So,
He
so
also had certain producers, certain key producers in his life who stood behind him, like Joe Papp and Gordon Davidson, and now Bob Brustein. And
yeah, but he had to come up here to do that first. We brought him up in '69 and introduced him to Joe and Gordon. But before that, he had to actually almost physically, and he literally physically built his own theater down there. It was a shed in Port of Spain. So there are other ways if you need to be.
Well, also, you talked about expanding horizons, about going to Russia and Playwright, as PJs do. Didn't you do a show in Russia?
Yeah, I went to Russia through the Shelikover seminar, which is much like, in a different sort of way, the Eugene O'Neill Theater Center, where I went in '91 with my play in Fat Freddy's Blues, and then it was chosen to go to Russia this past June, and that was just a wild experience, especially to hear my play done in Russian, with Russian actors. I was like, because there it was called Blues Tolstay Freddy. I like that. But it was, one of the things I said to George earlier, I said, one of the things I like about writing plays is you never know where you're going to end up.
I think you have to find out where you're going to end up right now with the first question.
Okay, my name is John Francis Fox. My question is for Horton Foote. Since part of your background as a writer was during the early days of TV, did that have any effect on your development as a playwright?
Well, I was in television really mainly at the time when it was very near theater. It wasn't really like cinema at all. And we were limited to 2 or 3 sets. We were based in New York. We used New York actors. We rehearsed them as we rehearsed plays. You couldn't stop them. In other words, they had to have a continuity like a play. You couldn't stop and cut. So I really used television at that time to develop and write one-act plays, which no one wanted in those days. And they since have been published as one-act plays and are done all over. But I learned, certainly you learn from anything, but I can't say really
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
That's interesting.
My name is Tanya Young. I'd like to address a question to George C. Wolfe. In your experience, what is the difference between writing a play in which the central character is a real-life person as opposed to a play where all the characters are fictional?
Oh, that's interesting. I just think that when a character is real, you have a built-in structure. Now, you can alter that structure, but ultimately, and in the case of Jelly, there are very certain personal and cultural and artistic truths that come with him, and how you arrange them determines on I don't know, it's just like having this drawer with all these objects in it, and then you can pull them out and put them up there, and they're contained. How you arrange them is somewhat the art of it, whereas I think that somewhat that at one point on the journey, those objects have to become personal, and your objects as well, and your demons and your journey as well. Whereas I think when you're creating something and it's coming from somewhere out here, I don't think that it's harder, but I think it requires I don't want to say a deeper journey, but a more complicated one, simply because I think every time you write a play, there is no universe. There is no right and wrong. There is no good and bad. And whereas in Jelly's world, Jelly grew up at a very certain time, so there was a right and a wrong and a good and bad. Whereas if I was to do a play, about Susan, I would have to invent, but not the Susan Birkenhead that I know, but the one in my head. I would have to invent all the rules of her dynamic and inform them with truths the way I see the world working. Whereas with Jelly, I had to figure out how my brain could work inside of his world. You know what I'm saying?
Thank you, Julie.
I'm Julie Kramer, and my question is also for Mr. Wolfe, and it's kind of related. Can you talk about the amount of research that you had to do for Jelly's Last Jam?
Oh, well, that's the thing which I love most. I'm working on a project now where I'm reading every single thing I can get my hands on. It's like in the case of Jelly, and Susan and Luther probably had similar or different journeys. The music is the first place, because there's so much emotion and truth and history in that music. Then going to New Orleans and hanging around and meeting with this old guy named Bill, God, I've forgotten his last name, who's like this expert on Jelly Roll Morton, and hearing someone who loved him dearly, speak of him, and just reading all the literature of the day, so you sort of find out what the rules and the attitudes of the people were. And I just think it's very exciting, because you have to surrender your universe and go inside of a whole other one, and not just study the character, but his world, the Creole world. What was New York in the 40s? What was that? And not just from the music, but from the art, I don't know. You know what I'm saying? It isn't just the person. It's their world. It's their God. It's their fears. It's the crimes.
Do you want to add to that, Susan? Because I think you would come into that too.
Yeah. Well, I think it's immersing oneself in it. It's going to live for a while in that world in order to be able to respond as a character from that world. It's not just the sound of it or the way it looks. It's attitudes. It's the most basic things about human experience, and then being able to respond as one of those people.
That's the context.
Yeah.
Lauren Scalprin, and this is to Wiley Hausam. Does the agent take on a project and nurture the production, or does he concentrate on one aspect as the director to the playwright?
Every show is different. Every project is different. But for instance, in the case of Jelly's Last Jam, I became George's agent in late February of '88, and the show was already, slightly in progress. And I worked on it in one way or another often with the producer, especially on a musical. It's very collaborative with the producer, really virtually every day until it opened and until after it opened. So
you take on casting too?
You discuss everything, everything comes together when it's really working right. And then there are situations where you find the producer, and maybe it's a lure at theater, and you make the deal, and you disappear for a while, and then you come back during previews. It depends on, each dynamic has its own specifics.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Victor Sina, and this question is directed towards Mr. Barry. You have so many terrific roles for women in your play, the Octet Bridge Club. And as a man, do you find it harder to write for women?
No. No, I don't. I think the Octet Bridge Club was based on my mother and her 7 sisters, so that I had I had memories of what I could remember of them, and that's the way I began. But I've never had trouble writing. I think I write good roles for women, and come and see the new play, and you'll see. But I've never had I've never had that trouble either. I don't know. I just do it.
Thank you.
Mildred Clinton. I would like to address this to Susan Birkenhead, please. Now, as a lyricist who did an adaptation of a very well-known play on What About Love, can you tell us the differences between doing something like that and then just starting from square one with a musical?
Well, that was a very different yet the same. That was an adaptation of a Murray Schiskell play, and it was getting Murray Schiskell's sound and attitude, sensibility into my head, and becoming an extension of his voice. In this case, it was going into a world and, as I said before, learning to immerse myself in that world, to immerse myself in a whole culture, which was an extraordinary experience for me and a great blessing. I was invited into a whole other culture and allowed to exist within that culture and to begin to write as a part of that culture. It was an extraordinary experience. Also because George is a playwright unlike any other playwright I know, and so it was constantly looking for things in the dark and looking for things with no precedent, just finding our way and saying, I guess we'll try this.
Thank you.
I'm Howard Goldberg. I have a question for Mr. Foote and Mr. Barry. What happens when the writer's vision is different from the director's vision of a play?
Well, I've really rarely had this problem, because usually I have found that it's best to try to find out the different visions before you start working together. And if I feel that we are not compatible and don't understand, I mean, it's perfectly true they can have a very valid vision that you don't think is correct for your play. And I think it's only sensible to talk this out before you begin rehearsals. And if it's so, then I suggest you don't work together, because I think it's nothing worse in the theater than this kind of war between playwright and director.
Yeah, I'd add to that too. I think this. I've not found that, and usually I've found if there has been some trouble along the way, it's usually me, the playwright, that hasn't completed something within the script. I mean, if you're starting to work together, I mean, I question that myself, but most of the time I've had good experiences by knowing ahead of time who you're working with. I mean, it's really, boy, is it important. Because the wars, I hate the wars too. There's enough that happens in any production without warring, without that coming in.
It doesn't mean that you don't welcome suggestions from the director and value them and want to use his wisdom because certain things are not working or whatever. But if the basic understanding is not there, I don't think it's ever going to work.
Yeah. I think it really is like a marriage. It's therefore before you marry, you go on a series of dates.
That's right.
And you talk, and you see whether or not, is this marriage going to work?
Yeah, I agree.
But a lot of that does relate to experience, too. I think a new playwright coming on and a director says, I want to do your play, it's a pretty seductive situation and can get them so that you can get, and I think the experience and knowledge of the
But I do feel, at least for myself, even as a young playwright, I've backed away. And I think it's suicide if you don't, because Lawrence Langdon once said to me that failure is terrible, but a failure that you feel that you've been part of and you've helped and you've fostered is the worst failure.
Yeah. I'd like a quick question for the panel. Can you tell us what your next project is, what you're thinking of doing?
Why don't we start this
Start,
way?
we're going to start here?
Oh.
Go around quickly.
Well, I'm hoping to get money for a film for my play, for The Widow Player. I hope Mr. Aikman finds the money to do my play in England. And I'm finished a play which I think the Alley Theatre is going to do in December, called A Young Man from Atlanta.
Susan?
Not much. Susan?
I'm in the middle of a movie now, an animated feature, and having a wonderful time. George and Luther and I will be doing another project, which is too early to talk about, but that is my great joy in life, to work with these two men again. And a couple of other projects that I have begun, but this is my greatest joy.
I'm working on a screenplay about a pygmy. I'm working on a play called Boz and Buzzard, the two-headed monster dances a jig in the Nightmare Review. And I'm reading. And because working on Jelly, it drained my brain of images, so I'm in the process of trying to stock back up, you know.
My new play, which I will be directing, A Distance From Calcutta, will be opening in January at the York Theatre, so I'm involved with that. Another play, which originated at the O'Neill and Fat Freddy's Blues, may be going into production very soon. And I've just finished a new play called Jump the Train at River Point. So.
Luther.
Well, presently I'm working on some concert pieces for the Canadian Brass, which is a chamber group I've worked with for some years, and also on recordings for the same group. I have to add that the reason I'm doing so much Canadian Brass now is because they're my regular clients that I had been, because of my colleagues over here, I've been forced to put on the back burner for the past 2 years. So I'm really in the process of catching up with that. Also, as I'm sure it is with most of us, that we're all reading various things. I have a couple of very interesting projects that promise to come into fruition, but as you say in the theater, it's bad luck to talk about it before it's right up to the minute.
Thank you very much. I think that my project is to have more time for these seminars and these wonderful people that are on it, and I find constantly there is not enough time to get all the information that they have to give to us. I hope someday we'll have more and more time, but in the meantime, I want to thank you all for being here, and this has been the American Theatre Wing Seminar on Working in the Theatre, and this seminar has been devoted to the playwright and director, the composer and the lyricist, and their roles in it. And I don't know when we've had so much wonderful and so much generous words coming out. I'm delighted to be president of an organization that can call upon these people. I'm delighted to be able to say that the American Theatre Wing, which has been doing this for so many years, continues to do it, and only with the help of people in the theater. I thank you all for being here, and this is just one of the Wing seminars on working in the theater, which are coming to you from the Graduate Center of the City University of New York, located right in the heart of Times Square. Thank you all for being here.